I titled this The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. This covers small operations up to our permitted ones. So, if your farm happens to be on this, I'm sorry. If the good farm on it, I'm proud of you. The good, every year more and more manure is being applied better to and for crop production. We've changed a lot of rules over the years, went from a nitrogen standard back in the 80s to both nitrogen and phosphorus. The number of warnings, NOVs, NODs for the permitted farms is going down. That's part of the good news. We still give them out if they deserve them, but more and more producers and CLMs are learning what some of the important practices are. Also the good, we've been having 100 to 150 attending certified livestock manager training each year, and going through the certification process, an additional 20 to 30 additional people are getting the actual certification each year. We've got almost 300 certified, and we just had our last training about a month ago. So we're still getting applications in. Each one of those that apply, that 299, we will do inspections on those or their permitted farms. Number of complaints on permitted facilities last year was 24, with 9 of them valid. So when you consider the number of facilities, the number of acres, it's understandable because there's not a perfect anything. Number of complaints against the certified livestock managers was 21. Only 13 of them involved some, and that's a complaint. That's not a final investigation. Only 13 of them were for manure application issues. We got a lot of training here at the Conservation Technology Conference. There's CLM recertification training offered. We get a lot at the Manure Science Review. So we got a lot of education occurring, a lot of information and understanding, and that's important. Right now, Ohio has almost everything under the same agency. The Ohio Department of Agriculture now has the Division of Soil and Water Conservation, the Division of Livestock Environmental Permitting, and the Division of Plant Health that regulate commercial fertilizers, manure from permitted farms and CLMs, and manure from small and medium-sized facilities. So it's all under the same house. Just a little review. Agricultural pollution means the failure to use management or conservation practices to abate the degradation of waters of state by animal manure or soil sediment. Those are the Division of Soil and Water's rules of ag pollution. Those BMPs are defined in the technical standards of the NRCS technical guide for the most part. Division of Soil and Water, the philosophies have been a fair enforcement procedure, emphasizing local review and peer evaluation, a public complaint procedure, technical assistance, and a desire for voluntary compliance through a cooperative solution. So, emphasis is still with the soil and water districts on getting problems solved locally in the ag pollution abatement for the soil and water districts. The waters of the state's the same for EPA, Division of Livestock Environmental Permitting, Division of Soil and Water, and SWCDs. It's basically all streams, lakes, ponds, wetlands, watercourses, waterways, wells, springs, irrigation systems, drainage systems, and all other bodies or accumulations of water, surface or underground. Now, you tell me what that doesn't include. That's pretty much everything is waters of the state. And that definition goes across agencies. In our Division of Livestock Environmental Permitting, it's much more detailed and regulatory. The Ohio Revised Code, Chapter 903, have the laws. The Ohio Administrative Code, Chapter 901:10, has the rules. Before 2000, there were no specific rules for the permitted operations to this extent. We have rules for permit to operate and permit to install. And both the rules and the permits dictate what is required by the larger facilities. So they're defined pretty specifically in the administrative code and the revised code. Some of the newest, and if you've been here before, you've heard me say, Senate Bill 1 was the last legislation passed. I keep getting asked, what's the rules? Senate Bill 1 caused the last change in both Division of Soil and Water, Plant Health, and our rules. It has new restrictions on manure and fertilizer application in the Western Basin. It has requirements for dredging and disposal of dredged material in Lake Erie, and it has additional requirements of the wastewater treatment plants. In the Division of Soil and Water Conservation, going back in history, in 1973, the first ag non-point pollution abatement began at DNR. In 1979, the first abatement rules were adopted. In 1991, enforcement authority and chief's orders were added, and on July 28, 2017, gave it civil penalty authority for small and medium operations. Trends over the life of the program, as the rules have been lenient, penalties are becoming more and more strict. You can't probably read this, but this is a High Revised Code 93907 dictates what is required for civil penalties. It does provide some protections in there, and it does require that an individual is offered the right for a hearing. So you have the right to make corrective actions, you have the right to have a hearing, except there are now civil penalties defined in the revised code and the administrative code. For minor violations, it's $250 for the first, and it goes up the more times you forget what you're supposed to be doing. Up to a maximum of $5,000. For moderate, starts at $2,000, goes to $10,000. For a major violation, it's $10,000. So there are penalties being issued right now, and I'll cover that in a minute. There is another provision in 09 of 939, this is a Division of Soil and Water Conservation, that a penalty can be assessed, and if there's no way of making corrective actions, that penalty in the Western Basin can be issued without corrective actions. So there are penalties being issued right now. That Western Basin is the area you're going to see more and more emphasis on additional regulations. I'll talk about that a little bit. If I don't, remind me to get back to it. New authority for manure in the Western Basin. It has basically no person shall surface apply manure under any of the following circumstances. Frozen snow-covered soil, saturation of the top 2 inches, when a weather forecast is calling for greater than 50% chance of a ½ inch or more in 24 hours. The restrictions do not apply if manure is injected, if it's incorporated within 24 hours, or the manure is applied to a growing crop. I'd like to cover a little bit more about some of the issues on the growing crop, and I will here in a minute. The restrictions also do not apply in the event of an emergency if the chief of the division or his designee provides written consent, where it would be less damaging than a direct discharge to waters of the state from the facility itself, or working to find another location to keep that facility from discharging, additional storage, to move it to a treatment plant, some other means of stopping the pollution. Restrictions also do not prohibit stockpiling of solid manures. Matter of fact, if it's permitted facility, stockpiling of solid manures is in the rules specifically over land application. In that stockpile would be a lot less risk than spreading it over the frozen snow-covered ground. Also at Senate Bill 1 had authority for fertilizer. Many of you now certified for that. It does include restrictions on fertilizer just like the manure, the frozen snow-covered, the saturation, and also basically the weather forecast is also in there. Only it's a little different in the amounts and the time period. So it's weather prediction of more than an inch, 50% chance more than an inch over a 12-hour period. I heard several other presenters talking about storms. We are getting more frequent, larger storms occurring. Those storms move the majority of the nutrients. The major rainfall events is what causes nutrients to move from either fertilizer or manure applications. So getting that fertilizer below the surface, getting it incorporated, whether it's fertilizer or manure, or applying it to a growing crop. We've had several violations. Well, the director may also assess a penalty for misuse of fertilizers, not following the rules on that. Senate Bill 1 also had new requirements. Anybody taking or applying manure from a permitted farm must either be a certified livestock manager or fertilizer certified. Now, the fertilizer certified, if you don't need to be fertilizer certified because you're small, the same rules would apply for manure taken from a permitted farm. You'd be exempt if you're a small operation, less than 50 acres. We have never allowed manure on frozen snow-covered ground applications without it being incorporated or injected since 2006. So the large permitted farms are never allowed to apply on frozen snow-covered ground since our rules changed in 2006. Snow-covered is when residue or ground cannot be seen because of snow cover or half-inch ice or more. Frozen is ground that's not able to be penetrated because it's frozen soil moisture. Saturated soils occur when all the pore spaces are filled with water. Above the field capacity, 100% saturated basically, no available water holding capacity remaining. Growing crops will vary by season. Any green plant that will be harvested that was planted as a cover crop that will not winter kill has to have a reasonable percent of ground cover. This is where we're going to get into some of the complaints from the small and medium operations. Weather prediction, we recommend using weather.gov, but we'll accept any copy of any forecast that shows the predictions and the amounts. And I'll talk about some of the problems with that. Injection is placing the manure or fertilizer beneath the soil surface. Incorporation is tillage. It mixes the manure into the soil to an average minimum depth of 4 inches, with 80% of the material covered by the soil. So poking holes in the soil with the manure on top is not considered incorporation. We want soil nutrient contact, be that fertilizer, manures, whatever. The bad. What's gone wrong? This is a Division of Soil and Water rule of a cover applying to a growing crop. Since January of this year, examples of 3 ways the growing crop exemption can lead to trouble. The crop was planted but barely emerged. And you see the frozen snow covered, and you can see the manure application. A little closer view. Anybody see a cover crop there? It was planted, but it wasn't there. That is not in accordance with the rules. So these operations are potentially receiving penalties for application. You can see a blade. That's hardly a cover. The second one's an example where they did not follow the recommended application rates or setbacks, leading to pollution. What's the setback on frozen snow-covered ground? 200 feet from waters of the state. That hasn't changed according to that standard, the 590. not quite 200 feet from the ditch. Again, not quite 200 feet from the ditch. Still, the ground was frozen, hadn't thawed out, but the water coming out of the tile doesn't look too good. There was an ammonia test, but I didn't get that in there. And the ammonia test on that was off the chart. The point is, even if you're following the standards, you need to make sure you're monitoring the surface and subsurface flow off that field at the first melt. And monitoring it before, during, and after application. Some of the problems that we see is the tile are running on a heavy load. There's a lot of water. It may not be in the surface 8 inches, but that soil profile has a lot of water in it. And when it's actively moving, that manure can get into that water flow and come out the outlet. So be aware of what's going on. The third one, cover crops that are winter killed are not growing. All three of these occurred in the month of January. There they applied to a field that had been planted to a cover crop. Can anybody read that from back there? It's 63% seed oats, 8% clover, 8% radish, 4% a different clover. Oats, do they winter kill?
Yeah.
There's not much. Radishes, winter kill. The clover might come back, but there's not much there. Again, not having enough cover that's growing that can absorb and utilize that nutrient. This is also one of the rules that has a lack of science behind it. I looked to see if there was any scientific basis for applying manure on a cover crop on frozen snow-covered ground. That's basically not any better water pollution-wise than putting it out, which we don't want to see done. It was a legislative law that was put in not based on science. If you're relying on that forever, it probably will change eventually. When they get the data that shows more that the edge of field does not reduce pollution from that, you'll probably see it go away. But laws are hard to change. They can only be changed by legislators. Even when things are done right, they can go to hell in a hurry. This summer we had several instances where the rules were followed, but the waters of the state were impacted and fish were killed. This is a picture of a rainfall event that occurred in Williams County. You might have seen the fish kill on the front page of the Toledo Blade. Poultry litter was going to be applied to wheat stubble. They had 5 fields, around 2 tons per acre, application rate. The farmer was planning on working it in and planting a cover crop. Matter of fact, before we got back, it was already worked in and covered to complete the investigation. Farmer had soil tests showing it needed the nutrients. They were all, the nutrients and soil test levels were down there below the mid-20 part per million on the field average. And he not only had 1 or 2 tests, he had a lot of 30-some soil tests for those 5 fields. The manure had originated out of Mercer County and was being sold to a farmer and applied by a certified livestock manager. The CLM had looked at the weather forecast, and that's a picture of that wheat stubble field and a riser that was in that field. The CLM had records of everything but the weather forecast. He said he looked at it, but he didn't have a record of it. We went back and researched the forecast for that area, which called for less than 50% chance of less than a ½ inch of rainfall. The CLM began applying that field, and there's this actual record report covering everything that we would require. Began applying at 8 a.m. He looked at the weather forecast that morning before. He stopped at 11 when it began raining. That specific small area received 2.4 inches of rainfall. This resulted in about a $16,000 fish kill. It's not too apparent, but that's the outlet of a box culvert at the headwaters of a dry ditch. That field tile there goes back to that riser. So that heavy rainfall basically carried the dry poultry litter from part of the field application, because he didn't have everything done in 3 hours. He was going to be there all day. That carried that manure into that downstream area. The rest of the larger watershed did not receive that extent of rainfall. They had some rain, but nothing to that amount, so that flush of a lot of water was not diluted by the rest of the watershed runoff. Worst case scenario. There were several other fish kills also occurring in the same time frame, first 2 weeks of August. Now, if you look at Dr. Kevin King's research, the best time to apply manure nutrients is July, August, September. It's the least chance of having nutrients move. This summer, Mother Nature didn't listen to us, or didn't listen to what her past history had been, and we got some pretty good rainfalls. One of the other ones that applied dairy manure after taking a cutting of alfalfa off up here in this field, and everything was done according to what needed to be. The manure was applied on August 1st. Rain event occurred 3 days later and caused a fish kill with several $1,000s of restitution. Again, he had records for the application. Had soil tests that showed the nutrients needed. It was applied with the right soil moisture, the right soil conditions to a growing crop. 3 days later, that rainfall carried manure to the tile, and it discharged, causing the fish kill. We had two other events similar, where the rainfall event occurred several days after application. So I don't have all the answers. I don't think there is a standard answer. Probably looking at fields that you have manure application during and after the first rainfall event would be probably a really good idea, seeing what occurred this last summer. As far as what do you need to do, if in doubt, don't do it. If it doesn't feel right, ask somebody else for advice, and if you can, avoid it. If you don't have the best conditions, I would probably encourage avoiding it. Have good records. That Williams County, the criminal investigators were looking at that to find anything that those individuals had done wrong, to do water quality violation penalties, up to $25,000, in addition to the fish kill. Make sure you got soil tests, 1 to 25 acres. Within the last 3 years, make sure you have manure tests. Use the nutrients where they're needed. If you don't use them, don't need them, get them somewhere where they can be utilized and not there to move. Keep weather predictions. I don't care what you have. If we had not been able to find the weather prediction for that morning of the Williams County event, he would have been up the river. Even though he looked at it, he didn't have anything to prove what it said. Look at the condition of the soil at the time of application. Look at the available water holding capacity. Some of this goes back to saturation. Some of it goes back to how many macropores are there. Watch the tile outlets and surface water patterns. Even go and watch them after the first rainfall event. Because even though you're following all the rules, you don't want it in the water. Division of Wildlife right now has anybody that causes a fish kill pays restitution. And they're very strict on that. There's not any excuses or ways out other than take it to court. What's next? There's a lot of rumors. There's going to be additional, because of the Western Basin and Lake area, because of additional nutrient issues, there are probably going to be proposals for new rules. Something's going to change. Regulations seldom go backwards. Problem I have with regulations is people want to make one solution for everybody. And they don't take time to think how many different types of farms, soils, personalities, methods of doing something there are on the farm. And I don't know of very many solutions that run clear across the state. There is one of the things being proposed is mandated nutrient management plans, whether it's fertilizer, biosolids, or manure. A mandatory requirement to have a nutrient management plan. Now, it's not me wanting this, but that's one of the things being kicked around. It would be a tremendous burden on everybody to do that, and I don't know what the term management plan, nutrient management plan, what the details in that definition would be. There'll probably be additional best management practices required. Somewhere coming up, I don't know what those practices will be. I would prefer that we make sure we're following the ones we've got before we require new ones. There'll be required monitoring of application fields till after the first rainfall event is one of the things that's been kicked around. That's one of the rumors, one of the proposals, one of the things I've seen. Some people want 100% guarantee that there will never be any impacts to waters of the state. That is almost impossible to guarantee with Mother Nature. It's not even possible with sanitary sewers and storm sewers yet. I don't know how they would do it with fields. Kevin's wishes. My wish would be one set of rules for everyone. We've got a set of rules for permitted farms, for CLMs, a different set for Grand Lake St. Mary's, a different set for small and medium producers, a different set now for Western Basin. It makes it very difficult, very confusing to explain to landowners, to producers, even to staff that are trying to follow up and make sure everybody's doing everything right. Because if you're farming on the border, right now you could have one farm that has 3 sets of rules that they need to follow. And I guarantee you they'll never be in full compliance of everything. No rule is 100% effective when Mother Nature rules. But they want guaranteed there's no fish killed from agriculture. They want guaranteed there's no nutrients moving off those fields. That's hard to do. When everything's being done correctly, my wish would be that we don't penalize for what cannot be controlled. In other words, that fellow that was up there doing everything with the cover crops and incorporating in the wheat field and got that rainfall event that caused it, I don't think he should have had to pay for that fish kill. Nobody pays for the fish kill when Mother Nature has a thunderstorm that turns the pond over and kills those fish because of that thunderstorm. But yet they're wanting to do something right now to penalize even when you're doing everything right. My last one is everybody would use common sense. That's probably a wish I'll never see done. And I'm talking about all sides, having an understanding and knowing when something's done right and there's an accident and it's unfortunate. Having everybody see some of the facts of those cases without having to go to court. The really ugly. Now, I was sitting out here at lunch and found out that this fellow turned around and did it again yesterday. To a different field. Sludge pump, directly to the pit of the hog barn, non-permitted. Probably that'll change shortly. Pumped it out into the 10-acre field. This is criminal as far as that application. Not only did he do it last week, he turned around and did it again yesterday. That is not manure application. That's a direct discharge. Going to the tile, going to the field ditch. We have those bad actors out there. I can't have any mercy of having pity on stupidity. And there's no secrets. This one came in from several different sources, including having the district find it. And it will be environmentally handled, enforcement. Questions? I'm just the bearer of all kinds of good news. One thing I'll point out is these will be on the website. Since I'm retiring in 30 days, that's my email and phone for the next 30 days. There's my cell phone and home email. And somebody say, why do you have Crazy Kev 2001? You guys know me. When did I take this job at permitting at ODA? That got my name, got attached to my name because of when I took the chief's position at Department of Agriculture for the permitting system. Any other questions? Yes?
Is there any place that has, like where you've got good accurate records already made up, just we can print them all, fill out, and know anything?
There are some samples on our website, or send us.
Repeat the question.
The question is, are there any place that you have good records that you can simply fill out? That one form that was there with the sketch on it had everything that's required. That form can be copied and used anywhere. You can take that form and duplicate the information in your iPad or in your cell phone and fill it out that way and keep it electronically. It's just, we don't prescribe a form, we make them available, but the information is on there is what you need to keep. There's another question back in the back.
Yeah, is there going to be cut and dry on the what % cover crop would need to be there to apply?
It has to, we don't have a cut and dry, but it needs to cover the ground, and we're not going to count blades of grass. But there needs to be a ground cover of vegetation, not a couple blades per square foot. And it does give flexibility a little bit, but it also always asks the question. I go back to the one slide. If it doesn't look right, doesn't feel good, it's probably not. If you got a question on your cover crop, call the local soil and water district, have them come out and give you because they'll be the one that gives you thumb up, thumbs down, or be the first responder basically. Yes?
Are you going to be crazy enough to consult in this field after you retire?
Am I going to be crazy enough to consult in this field after I retire? I will not say no, but my brother wants me back to help. We're both getting older that I can't run two jobs. So retirement's going to look good. I'll be on the corn planter and sprayer in April after I retire in March. But I will be available. I mean, if there are questions, that's my cell phone and email.
Well, let's thank the old guy for the final presentation.